Story 1. Hi, I'm writing this because I need to get this off my chest, and honestly, I still can't believe what's been happening to me. I'm an accountant, so I'm used to dealing with facts and numbers, not whatever this is. Let me start by saying that this all began before the recent epidemic, so I want to make it clear that what I'm about to describe has nothing to do with that or any treatments related to it. I'm in my late 30s, a bachelor, and I've always enjoyed the peace and quiet of living alone in a nice, spacious house. I live in California, where the weather is usually perfect, warm, sunny, and comfortable. My home is a 3-bedroom place, plenty of space for one person, and I've always loved it. It's got everything I could want: a big kitchen, a cozy living room, and a bedroom that's always been my sanctuary, until recently. One night, I was sleeping soundly when something woke me up. At first, I didn't know what it was. Maybe it was a noise or just a feeling, but when I opened my eyes, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, crouching next to my bed, was a figure, a being. Its skin was a grayish blue, hairless, with a human-like face, but its head was large and oddly shaped. It just sat there, staring at me. It was a horrifying and chilling sight. In a state of shock, my first instinct was to defend myself. I swung my fist hard at the creature, desperate to make it go away. But as soon as my hand should have made contact, the thing just vanished, disappeared into thin air, like it was never there to begin with. I lay there, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what just happened. I convinced myself it had to be some sort of hallucination. Maybe the heat of the summer night had gotten to me, or it was just a vivid nightmare brought on by stress. I was shaken. Eventually, I managed to convince myself that it wasn't real, and somehow, I drifted back to sleep. A week later, it happened again. This time, I woke up to find the same being standing next to my bed, looking down at me with those unsettling eyes. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't hesitate. I lashed out again, trying to hit it as hard as I could. But just like before, my fist went right through it, and the creature disappeared, leaving me alone in the dark. This time, though, it felt different. The terror was more intense, and the disbelief harder to shake. I was starting to wonder if I was losing my mind. Then, half a week later, it happened yet again. But this time, things took a terrifying turn. As I lashed out to hit the creature, it caught my arm in midair, its grip like a vice. It didn't vanish into thin air. Instead, it was all too real, and it wasn't going anywhere. My heart felt like it was going to explode from fear as the being pinned me down on the bed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Then, I heard it. A voice in my head, cold and threatening. "I am leaving now, but we are coming back for you." The words echoed in my mind, filling me with a dread I had never known before. The next day, I was a wreck. I went to the doctor, desperate for answers, and told him I'd been hallucinating. He gave me a prescription for stress and a referral to see a psychiatrist. I needed to believe that it was all in my head, that I was just losing my grip on reality. 2 days later, on a Monday evening, I was working late. By the time I got home, it was dusk. As I approached my front door, something caught my eye: movement inside the house. Through the window next to the door, I could see shadows shifting. My heart sank. As I peered through the window, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I noticed 2 figures moving around inside my house. They looked just like the being that had been tormenting me. They were rifling through drawers and opening cabinets. Panicking, I tried to back away from the door quietly. But then, my back bumped against something, or rather, someone. I turned around, and there it was. The same being that had haunted me for weeks. My fear was overwhelming. For a moment, I was frozen in place. But then, instinct took over. I swung around to attack it, but it was too fast and too strong. It quickly overpowered me and pinned me against the wall. In an instant, the other 2 beings were there as well. I couldn't understand how they had appeared so quickly. My front door was still closed. Maybe they had used the patio door on the side, but then I remembered how these beings could materialize and dematerialize at will. My memory of the confrontation goes blank after that. The next thing I remember is waking up on a metal slab in a strange place. There were 2 beings in front of me and 1 behind. The slab felt like it was suspended in midair. I couldn't tell where I was. Some kind of alien spacecraft, perhaps, but I had no way of knowing for sure. The examination began almost immediately. The beings subjected me to a horrifying series of procedures. They inserted probes into various orifices, drew blood, and used massive needles to draw fluids from my stomach, and even my eyes. The pain was excruciating. Finally, a mechanical arm injected me with a light brown liquid. I was terrified and in shock, but there was nothing I could do. To this day, I am traumatized by the event. After the examination, I was taken down a long hallway lined with cages. Inside, there were people who looked just like me, but there were also beings unlike anything I had ever seen. Everyone was clearly distressed. Some were banging against the glass, or whatever translucent barrier was keeping them confined. The sight was utterly traumatic. They threw me into one of these cells. There was no bed, no furniture, just an empty, cold space. Almost immediately, I started to feel violently ill. I realized it must have been from the injection. I passed out, only to wake up several times to vomit. Each time I lost consciousness again, overwhelmed by the sickness. I remember waking up on the floor of the foyer in my own house. It was morning. I dragged myself to bed, feeling incredibly sick. When I finally checked the time on my phone, I saw it was Saturday, almost 6 days since the last thing I remembered. By Sunday, I was starting to feel a bit better. By Monday, I wasn't fully recovered, so I called the office to explain my absence. I told them I had been in the hospital with a severe infection and too sick to contact them. I returned to work on Tuesday. Since then, my life has been a nightmare. My health has continued to fluctuate unpredictably. On 2 more occasions, I woke up to find the being crouching and watching me. Each time, I felt too defeated to fight it off. Eventually, the visit stopped, but the terror remains. I live in constant fear. I never know when those beings will return. What will they do to me next? Fortunately, so far, they have not come back, and I pray every day that I never again encounter them. But it's not only my mental health that has been screwed up by them. My physical health has never fully recovered, and I find myself falling ill from time to time. Medical examinations reveal a range of issues with my blood, but none of them seem to be connected, and the doctors have been unable to pinpoint or cure the problems. I'm frequently in and out of appointments with various medical experts, and my life has become a constant struggle. I can only pray that no one else has to endure the same horrifying nightmare that I'm living through. Cheers. Anonymous. Story 2.
Welcome to this special feature on Elizabeth Klarer. Today, we're deviating from our usual format of sharing viewer-submitted stories to explore the fascinating life of Elizabeth Klarer, a key figure in UFO history. Join us as we delve into her remarkable experiences and legacy. Elizabeth Klarer, born Elizabeth Woolat on July 1, 1910, in the tranquil town of Mooi River, Natal, South Africa, would become a figure of profound intrigue and controversy. Known for her striking claims of extraterrestrial contact, Klarer captivated the world with stories that began in her childhood and spanned decades, peaking between 1954 and 1963. Her journey into the unknown began innocuously enough, with a purported visitation when she was just 7 years old. In 1956, she began to publicly share her encounters, making headlines with her assertion that she had been contacted by aliens multiple times. But Elizabeth's story took an even more sensational turn. She was not just a contactee, she was among the first women to claim a sexual relationship with an extraterrestrial being. In her book Beyond the Light Barrier, Elizabeth strived to convey these profound messages. Elizabeth's vision was not without its critics, yet it resonated with many who longed for hope and harmony in a tumultuous world. She spoke of a conspiracy, an international cover-up designed to keep humanity in the dark about alien technology and the true nature of the universe. At the age of 7, Elizabeth and her older sister Barbara claimed to have their first UFO encounter. While feeding their cilium puppies outside the farmhouse, they witnessed a silver disk bathed in a pearly luster swooping over them. Simultaneously, a giant, orange-red and cratered planetoid was observed orbiting and rotating high in the atmosphere. The disk rushed to meet it, guiding it northwards while the planetoid left a smoke trail in its wake. Only months later, Elizabeth had another sighting in the company of Latham, their Zulu farm manager. Latham interpreted the sighting through the lens of Zulu mythology. Elizabeth sometimes alluded to an even earlier sighting, at age 3 in 1913 or 1914. Elizabeth completed a 4-year diploma in meteorology at Girton College, Cambridge, and was taught by her first husband to fly a Tiger Moth light aircraft. During a 1937 flight from Durban to Baragwanath in a Leopard Moth aircraft, Elizabeth and her husband reportedly saw a saucer that approached, coasted along, and then departed. During World War II, Elizabeth held a responsible position in RAF intelligence. In 1954, Elizabeth Klarer's sister May, residing on the farm Whiteleaf in the Natal Midlands, informed her of reports from the native Zulu people about the appearance of the lightning bird in the sky. Responding to these intriguing accounts, Elizabeth and her children traveled from Johannesburg to the farm, and on December 27th, she ascended Flying Saucer Hill. It was there she claimed to witness a starship descending. The ship hovered 3 meters above the ground, emitting a soft hum. Its hull spun while its central dome remained stationary. Through one of 3 portholes, Elizabeth saw a spaceman who later identified himself as Akon. However, a barrier of heat emanating from the ship prevented her from approaching, and the scout ship eventually departed. On April 7, 1956, Elizabeth returned to the hilltop after further reports of the lightning bird. This time, Akon took her aboard his scout ship, a craft approximately 60 feet in diameter. Akon was tall, with blonde hair and rather piercing blue eyes. Inside the craft, she met a second pilot, described as stocky and darker skinned than Akon, who was supposedly both a botanist and an astrophysicist. Elizabeth was shown a lens offering views through the craft's floor. With only a hum emanating from below and no sense of movement, they were transported to an enormous cigar-shaped mothership with a garden-like interior. After meeting its inhabitants, she was returned to the hilltop. During the encounter, kisses were exchanged, and Akon revealed that Elizabeth was a reincarnated Metonian and his long-lost soulmate. He explained that Metonians occasionally took Earthwomen as partners to strengthen their race with new blood, and claimed that a number of Metonians were living surreptitiously among humans. On April 30, 1956, from 5:45 p.m. until 2 a.m., various observers noted a steady red glow poised at a rocky section of the hill. No sign of a fire was found afterwards. On July 17, 1956, after the family farm was sold, Elizabeth revisited the area and claimed to have taken a series of 7 photos of Akon's scout ship using her sister's simple brownie box camera. She described vivid light flashes turning into a dull gray craft enveloped in a shimmering heat haze. For an hour, the disk darted silently over a rise near the farmhouse, making several weaving detours, and shone like silver in bright sunlight before streaking away out of sight. Edgar Sievers, a ufologist from Pretoria, noted that Elizabeth's family saw her leave the homestead alone and suggested that it would have been difficult for the frail Elizabeth to throw a car hubcap and photograph it simultaneously. He also stated that no type of hubcap was known to sufficiently resemble the disc in the photos. In April 1958, Elizabeth Klarer reported a series of extraordinary contacts that set her story apart from the typical UFO narratives of the 1950s. She claimed that Akon's visits culminated in a day-long rendezvous on the high plateau of Cathkin Peak. During this encounter, Akon presented her with a silver ring that enhanced their telepathic connection, and their love was consummated, leading to the conception of a child. I surrendered in ecstasy to the magic of his lovemaking, our bodies merging in magnetic union as the divine essence of our spirits became one, Elizabeth later recounted. According to Klarer, after a terrestrial pregnancy, she and her MG car were transported in 1959 to Akon's home planet Meton, which orbits Proxima Centauri in the Alpha Centauri star system. There, she delivered a son named Ailing. He remained on Meton to be educated, while Elizabeth reluctantly returned to Earth. She claimed that Meton's planetary vibrations affected her heart, preventing her from returning. Instead, she received follow-up visits from Akon and Ailing. The entire trip, including the delivery and return, supposedly took no more than 4 months. However, due to differences in space-time, she experienced a 9-year stay on Meton. There were no cities or skyscrapers as Earth people know them anywhere on Meton. Homes were scattered in park-like grounds. There was an abundance of all things needed by civilization: food, water, and all materials for building, an unlimited supply of energy on tap from the atmosphere and the universe. No shortages of any kind, and no monetary system at all, she described. Klarer took her time before publishing a book about her extraterrestrial adventures, titled Beyond the Light Barrier, which was released in 1980. On his world lecture tour in the late 1950s, George Adamski, another well-known UFO contactee, made a point of visiting South Africa to meet Klarer and discuss their experiences with the friendly, wise Space Brothers. By that time, Klarer was not the only Adamski follower to claim experiences of space motherhood. Despite the ridicule from the press due to her outlandish claims, Elizabeth welcomed any attention as it helped disseminate Akon's message, which she considered a life task of utmost importance. From about 1960 to 1966, Elizabeth worked on the manuscript for her book, which now included the Akon love saga. She felt compelled to reveal the truth. In 1968, she was interviewed by ufologist Cynthia Hind, with Hind's write-up appearing in the August edition of Fate magazine. Another ufologist, Kitty Smith, reached out to Elizabeth after reading about her in Outspan magazine, and even claimed her own sighting of Akon's ship in January 1984. Elizabeth was vocal against other alleged alien contactees like Anne Grevler and Philip Heumann, challenging their claims and methods. Her firm stance was that space beings would never communicate through trance mediums or other such methods. In 1975, Elizabeth was invited by Hermann Oberth to the 11th International Congress of UFO Research Groups in Wiesbaden, Germany, where she delivered a speech that earned a standing ovation. Despite her age and the difficulty of the journey, Elizabeth faithfully commemorated the anniversary of her union with Akon every 7th of April by returning to Flying Saucer Hill. She befriended South African Air Force helicopter pilots who facilitated her visits to the hill when horseback rides became too challenging. Elizabeth's third husband, Aubrey Fielding, passed away in 1981, and his ashes were scattered on Flying Saucer Hill. Elizabeth herself died of breast cancer at age 84, leaving her second book, The Gravity File, unfinished. This book aimed to fill in the gaps of her first book, explaining the military and political aspects of UFO research and Akon's electrogravity propulsion technology. Before her death, Elizabeth shared with acquaintances that her son Ailing, like Akon, was now an astrophysicist, traveling the universe with his father, his spacewoman Clea, and their son.
Story 3. I'm not usually one to share stories like this, but a few months ago, something happened that I just can't shake. I live in a quiet town near a small forested lake where my cabin sits right on the water's edge. It's the kind of place people dream of retiring to, peaceful, serene, and far from the chaos of city life. I'm a retired educator, and my days are spent fishing, fixing up the cabin, or sitting by the lake, watching the stars. It was an idyllic life, until that night when everything changed. It started like any other evening. The lake was still, the stars were clear, and the only sound was the occasional splash of fish breaking the surface. I've always loved stargazing. The sky here is perfect for it. But on this particular night, something caught my eye, a light, hovering just above the lake. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe the moon playing tricks on me. But this light wasn't behaving like a reflection. It was moving, slowly, deliberately, like it was searching for something. My first thought was maybe it was a plane, but it was too low, too quiet. No sound at all, actually. It didn't make any sense. The light kept getting closer, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. That's when I saw it. This strange glowing object hovering just above the water in the middle of the lake. It was too big to be a drone, too smooth and metallic to be anything man-made. I grabbed my binoculars, trying to get a better look, and that's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This thing, it wasn't just some odd light, it was a craft, egg-shaped, metallic, with a faint glow surrounding it. I sat there, frozen, watching it hover in place as if it were observing something, and that's when I knew. I wasn't alone. I don't know what came over me that night. Any sensible person would have probably gone inside, locked the doors, and called the police, or at least tried to ignore what they saw. But something about that craft, hovering so silently over the lake, pulled me in. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped on my old boots, and headed down to the shore. The air felt strange as I approached the water, like it was charged with static electricity. You know that feeling before a thunderstorm, when everything goes quiet, and you can almost taste the tension in the air? That's what it was like. Even the usual sounds of nature, crickets, the gentle lapping of the water, the occasional owl, had disappeared. It was dead silent, and that silence was unnerving in a way I can't fully describe. I hesitated for a moment, standing there on the edge of the dock. The object was just sitting there, maybe 200 feet out, perfectly still. It didn't seem to notice me, or if it did, it didn't care. I felt like I was trespassing on something that wasn't meant for human eyes. But my curiosity got the better of me. I unhooked my little rowboat from the dock, careful not to make a sound, and pushed off into the lake. Rowing toward the craft was surreal. The closer I got, the more I could feel this strange pressure in my chest, almost like the air was pushing back against me. The lake, usually calm and reflective like glass at night, had a strange ripple spreading from the center where the object hovered. The water wasn't disturbed by the wind or movement, but it rippled gently, like the object was somehow influencing the surface tension of the lake itself. As I got closer, maybe 50 feet away, I finally got a good look at it. The thing was smooth, almost too smooth, like it had been molded from one single piece of metal. It was hard to tell what material it was made of, but it had this dull glow, as if it was absorbing the moonlight rather than reflecting it. No seams, no rivets, no visible propulsion system. It was completely alien, in the truest sense of the word. Whatever it wasn't from here. I stopped rowing for a moment, letting the boat drift in the water, just taking it all in. That's when the strange humming started. It wasn't loud, not at all, but it vibrated through the air and through my bones. It was a low-frequency sound, like something I could feel more than hear. My flashlight flickered, and the air felt thicker, heavier. I almost turned back. Something deep inside me was telling me to go back, to leave this thing alone, but I kept going. I couldn't stop myself. I rowed a little closer, maybe 20 feet away now, close enough to see details on the surface of the craft. There were these faint, glowing symbols along the side, like nothing I'd ever seen before. They weren't letters or numbers, but they looked deliberate, like a language, something too complex for me to understand. I leaned forward, straining to get a better look, when suddenly, without warning, a section of the craft's side started to open. Not like a door or a hatch you'd expect, but the metal itself seemed to melt away, forming an opening. At that moment, I froze. My hands locked onto the oars, and my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. All I could do was stare at that dark opening, wondering what the hell was about to come out of it. And then, they stepped out. Two figures emerged from the opening in the craft, and to this day, I still have trouble describing exactly what they looked like. They weren't like the grays people talk about in most abduction stories. These beings were taller, almost as tall as a full-grown human, but slimmer, with a grace in their movement that felt completely unnatural, like they were moving in slow motion, even though everything was happening at normal speed. Their skin, or at least what I thought was their skin, was pale, almost translucent, with a faint shimmer to it, like it was reflecting the light from the moon and the craft itself. They didn't have the exaggerated features you might expect. No oversized heads or bulbous black eyes. Instead, their faces were smooth, almost featureless. They had eyes, yes. Large, dark, and completely emotionless. But no mouths, no nose, nothing that would resemble a human face aside from those haunting eyes. I remember gripping the oars so hard that my knuckles turned white. I didn't dare move. I didn't even breathe, afraid that any sound or movement might provoke them. But they didn't seem to notice me at first. They just stood there, at the edge of the craft, hovering just above the surface of the water. That's right. They weren't standing on the boat or the lake. They were somehow suspended above it, like the laws of physics didn't apply to them. And then one of them turned toward me, slowly, deliberately. I'll never forget that moment, the feeling that washed over me when those dark eyes locked onto mine. It was like my mind was being pried open, invaded by something far beyond my understanding. I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I felt was this overwhelming sensation of being examined. Like every thought, every memory, every emotion I had was laid bare in front of them. It wasn't just fear that I felt, though there was plenty of that. There was something deeper, something primal, an understanding that these beings were far older, far more advanced than anything I could comprehend. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself that this wasn't happening. Maybe it was some elaborate prank, some kind of dream. But deep down, I knew. This was real, and it was happening right in front of me. One of the beings extended its hand, or at least what I assumed was a hand. It was long, with thin fingers, and it moved with an elegance that didn't match its unnerving appearance. The gesture wasn't threatening, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was almost like they were offering something. Or maybe they were asking for something. I couldn't tell. I just sat there, paralyzed, watching as it reached out toward me. And then, without a single word or sound, images started flashing in my mind. Rapid, vivid bursts that I couldn't control. I saw distant worlds, strange landscapes bathed in alien colors. I saw towering structures made of materials I didn't recognize. I saw beings like them, traveling through vast, endless spaces. And then, the images shifted. Flashes of Earth, but not as it is now. Cities crumbled, landscapes scarred and broken. There was a sense of loss, of warning, almost like they were trying to tell me something urgent. I wanted to speak, to ask them what it all meant, but I couldn't. My throat was dry and my mind felt foggy, overloaded with all the information they were pushing into my head. It was like they were communicating, but not with words, not even with thoughts. It was something else, something deeper, more instinctual. I couldn't understand all of it, but I could feel their emotions, sadness, desperation, a need for something they couldn't find. Maybe they were explorers or refugees, or maybe they were something far more dangerous. Before I could make sense of it, the connection broke. The images stopped, and I was left sitting there in my boat, shaking, with the two figures still hovering silently above the lake. They didn't move. They didn't react. They just watched. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they turned back toward the craft. The opening in the side closed behind them, the surface of the craft rippling as if it had never opened in the first place. The humming sound grew louder for a moment, and the air around me seemed to buzz with electricity. My boat rocked gently in the water, and before I could even think to react, the craft lifted off, silently, effortlessly, rising up into the night sky until it was nothing more than a faint light blending in with the stars. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring up at the empty sky, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. But there was no making sense of it. Not then, not ever. For a long time I just sat there, floating in the middle of the lake, too stunned to move. The sky was clear again, the stars twinkling as if nothing had happened. It almost felt like the whole encounter had been a dream, but the buzzing in the air still lingered, a reminder that it had been all too real. Eventually I rowed back to shore, though I barely remembered doing it. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the flashes of images and emotions they'd shown me. Were they trying to communicate with me? Warn me? Why me, of all people? What did they want? The questions faded, replaced by a growing sense of dread. As I docked the boat and returned to the cabin, I felt I wasn't alone anymore, both physically and mentally. The images replayed in my mind, echoing their emotions: sadness, urgency, loneliness. These beings didn't feel like invaders, but seemed to be searching or trying to warn us. What unsettled me was that the crumbling cities and scarred landscapes resembled Earth, not some alien world. I couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't their first visit. That night, I stared at the fire, unable to sleep. The images of alien cities and Earth's devastation felt deeply personal, as if they had chosen me for a reason I didn't understand. Their fear troubled me, not of us, but of something bigger. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe my tale of contact with beings from another world? The lake felt different, like something was still there, watching. I couldn't shake the feeling they hadn't left. The next morning, I rowed back to where the craft had hovered, needing proof it wasn't just a dream. But the lake was calm and quiet, as if nothing had happened. I searched for hours, hoping to find some sign that the encounter was real, but there was no physical evidence. I should have been relieved, but the lack of proof only deepened the mystery. How could something so real leave no trace? The questions haunted me, but I had no answers. Then strange things began happening around the house. My flashlight flickered with fresh batteries, my phone lost signal near the lake, and the air around the cabin seemed to hum at night. More unsettling were the vivid dreams of that night, dreams that felt more like memories. I'd see the craft and the glowing symbols, and the being's message became clearer, more urgent. The images of the alien cities and the devastated Earth replayed in my mind, and I felt more connected to them. When I woke up, the symbols were burned into my memory. Odd things appeared around the property too, symbols drawn in the sand that resembled those on the craft. I heard faint humming from the lake at night. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew something had changed. I didn't dare tell anyone. When I mentioned strange lights to a friend, he laughed it off. People don't want to believe things like this. So I kept it to myself and grew more isolated, feeling disconnected from the world. Weeks passed, and I tried returning to my routine, but I wasn't the same. That night changed me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter wasn't over, that they weren't finished with me. As I sat on the porch staring at the lake, I began to accept that I might never understand what had happened. Maybe I wasn't meant to. I've thought about sending this story to you for a long time, wondering if anyone would believe me, if anyone could help me understand what really happened that night. I don't expect answers, but I need to share it. Maybe there are others out there like me, people who've experienced something they can't explain. Maybe if we share our stories, we can start to piece together the bigger picture. Because one thing I'm sure of now is that we're not alone. They're out there, watching, waiting, and for whatever reason they chose me. I just hope that whatever their message was about, we're ready for it. Story 4. Barney and Betty Hill, an American couple, claimed to be abducted by extraterrestrials in New Hampshire in 1961. Their story, known as the Hill abduction or Zeta Reticuli incident, was widely publicized. The Hills' account has been the subject of much debate and has inspired numerous books and films. The couple had a good reputation in their community. Barney worked diligently as a postal worker, while Betty, a social worker, was deeply engaged in civil rights activism. As an interracial couple, Barney being black and Betty white, they had already overcome societal challenges and shared a strong bond of love and mutual respect. But what they experienced on that fateful night would test their reality and place them at the center of a phenomenon that would fascinate and terrify millions. It was a quiet evening on September 19th, 1961, when Barney and Betty, a seemingly ordinary couple from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, were driving home from a short vacation in Canada. Little did they know, that night would mark the beginning of one of the most famous alien abduction stories in history. Betty, using binoculars, observed a peculiar, brightly lit craft moving across the moon's surface. Recalling her sister's previous UFO sighting, she suspected she might be witnessing something similar. Barney, initially identifying the object as a commercial airliner heading toward Vermont, quickly changed his mind. The craft's abrupt and inexplicable descent convinced him that it was no ordinary aircraft. The Hills cautiously navigated their way through the secluded Franconia Notch, slowing down to observe the approaching object. As it passed over the restaurant and signal tower on Cannon Mountain, the craft appeared near the iconic Old Man of the Mountain. Betty estimated its size to be at least 1.5 times the length of the 40-foot granite profile and noted its apparent rotation. The couple watched in awe as the silent, glowing object performed erratic maneuvers in the night sky. Approximately 1 mile south of Indian Head, the Hills encountered a terrifying descent. The object rapidly approached their vehicle, forcing Barney to stop in the middle of the highway. The massive silent craft hovered above their 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, filling the entire windshield. Barney cautiously approached the object. Through binoculars, he claimed to see 8 to 11 humanoid figures observing him from the craft's windows. A long structure descended from its underside. The silent craft hovered within 50 to 80 feet overhead and 300 feet away. On October 21, 1961, Barney reported to NICAP investigator Walter Webb that the beings were not human. Upon returning home near dawn, the Hills reported experiencing strange sensations and inexplicable impulses. Betty insisted their luggage be stored near the back door, away from the main part of the house. Their watches had stopped working. Barney noticed that the leather strap of his binoculars was torn, despite no recollection of it happening. The toes of his best dress shoes were scuffed. To cleanse themselves, they took long showers and each drew a detailed picture of their encounter. The Hills struggled to recall the exact sequence of events during their encounter and subsequent drive home. Their memories became hazy and incomplete shortly after hearing the buzzing sounds. After a brief rest, Betty discovered that her dress, worn during the incident, was torn at the hem, zipper, and lining. She also noticed a strange pink powder on the dress. Despite attempts to remove the powder by hanging the dress outside, the damage was irreparable. Initially discarding the dress, she later changed her mind and stored it in her closet. Over the years, 5 different laboratories have conducted chemical and forensic analyses on the dress. The Hills discovered strange, shiny, concentric circles on their car's trunk that had not been present the day before. While experimenting with a compass, they noticed that the needle would spin rapidly when brought near the circles. However, when moved a few inches away, the needle would return to normal. Walter N. Webb, a Boston astronomer and NICAP member, met with the Hills on October 21, 1961. In a 6-hour interview, they described the UFO encounter in detail. Barney admitted he had a mental block and suspected there were parts he didn't want to remember. Webb concluded they were telling the truth, but acknowledged minor uncertainties due to human judgment. 10 days after the encounter, Betty had vivid dreams about the event. She shared them with Barney, but he wasn't concerned. Betty started writing down the details. One dream involved a roadblock and men forcing her and Barney to walk in a forest. The men were small, gray, and appeared almost human. They watched the craft's departure before continuing their drive home. The Hills couldn't explain the missing time during their trip. They remembered little of the 35-mile stretch of U.S. Route 3. They both recalled an image of a fiery orb on the ground. The Hills wanted to use hypnosis to recover forgotten memories. The couple sought answers, eventually undergoing hypnosis with a well-known psychiatrist. Under hypnosis, Barney and Betty's experiences came flooding back in chilling detail. Both described being taken aboard the spacecraft, examined by the extraterrestrial beings, and shown strange, unfamiliar instruments. Betty even recalled seeing a star map, which, years later, would be linked to the Zeta Reticuli star system by ufologists. This is how the incident came to be known as the Zeta Reticuli incident. Under hypnosis, Barney recalled that the binocular strap broke when he ran from the UFO back to his car. He remembered driving away but felt compelled to pull off the road and drive into the woods. He saw 6 men standing on the dirt road. The car stalled and 3 of the men approached. Barney described the beings as similar to Betty's recollection. He said their eyes had a terrifying, mesmerizing effect. While Betty reported a conversation with the leader in English, Barney said he heard them speaking in a mumbling language he didn't understand. Betty also mentioned this detail. Barney said that when they communicated with him, it seemed to be thought transference. Betty's hypnosis sessions were similar to her dreams, with some differences. The technology on the craft, the short men's appearance, and the abduction sequence differed. However, Barney's and Betty's memories were consistent. The Hills returned to their normal lives. They discussed the UFO encounter with friends and family. In 1965, a newspaper story about the Hills appeared, leading to international attention. Betty and Barney's story, though initially met with skepticism, sparked a wave of public interest. The account became the subject of the best-selling 1966 book, The Interrupted Journey, and was later adapted into the 1975 film, The UFO Incident. Their experience, one of the first widely publicized alien abduction claims, opened the door to many others coming forward with their own encounters. Though Barney passed away in 1969, Betty continued to share their story until her death in 2004. Today, their legacy lives on, with much of Betty's notes and tapes preserved in the University of New Hampshire's permanent collection. In 2011, the state of New Hampshire even erected a historical marker commemorating the site where their alleged encounter with the unknown began. The Hills case remains one of the most compelling and well-documented alien abduction stories to this day, leaving us to wonder, what really happened that night? Were the Hills truly visited by beings from the stars, or was it all a strange trick of the mind? The answers may forever lie hidden in the darkness of that rural New Hampshire road. Story 5. G'day. I'm not one for writing letters, let alone sharing something like this, so please make style adjustments as you require. Look, what I've been through has been weighing on me. I reckon it's time to get it off my chest. Just call me Jack, though it's not my real name. I live out in the wheat belt region of Western Australia. Not much out here except for miles of open farmland and the odd kangaroo. I've been a wheat and sheep farmer all my life, just like my dad before me. It's a tough way to make a living, but it's honest work, and it keeps me close to the land, which is where I've always felt most at home. Life's simple out here. I get up before the sun, check on the sheep, make sure the crops are coming along, and fix whatever needs fixing. It's a peaceful sort of life, really, the kind that a lot of blokes in the city dream of, though they wouldn't last a week out here. It can get a bit lonely at times, just me, the dog, and the wide open sky, but I've always been content with that. Never been one for crowds anyway. But something happened a few months back, something that's been gnawing at me ever since, and no matter how much I try to focus on the farm, I can't shake it. Things haven't been the same since that night. It was a normal evening, just after sundown. I was out checking on the sheep before calling it a night. We'd had a few foxes around lately, and I wanted to make sure the flock was safe. The sky was clear, stars scattered everywhere like they always are out here. But then, something caught my eye, some strange lights off in the distance. At first, I thought nothing of it. Could have been a plane or maybe a weather balloon. We get the odd aircraft flying over, though not often. The lights were moving slowly, almost like they were drifting. Didn't think too much of it then, just went back to finishing up. But the next night, there they were again. Same spot, same strange, slow movement. I stood there for a while, watching, trying to make sense of it. Couldn't hear anything. No engine noise, no hum, just those lights glowing in the distance. I figured it had to be something explainable, so I brushed it off, went back inside, and thought nothing more of it. But they kept coming back. Each night those lights were there, and each time they seemed a bit closer. I couldn't help but watch them, wondering what they were. After a few nights, it started to get under my skin. I'd heard stories from other farmers about strange things happening out here, but I always thought it was just talk. Bored men making up tales after a few too many beers. But now, I wasn't so sure. I'll never forget that night. The lights had been coming and going for a few weeks by then, and I was almost getting used to seeing them, like they were becoming part of life out here. But this night was different. I was out later than usual, checking on the sheep again, when I noticed the lights, only this time they were real close, hovering right above the far side of the paddock. I stood there, staring, trying to make sense of it, when suddenly the lights dimmed, like they'd been swallowed by the darkness. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought I was seeing things. Right in the middle of my field was a figure, a woman, but not like any woman I'd ever laid eyes on. She had to be nearly 7 feet tall, with a figure that was just, well, perfect. She was wearing this tight, dark blue bodysuit that hugged her body, and her long, blonde hair flowed down her back, almost glowing in the moonlight. But it was her eyes that really got me, piercing blue, like they could see right through you. She didn't say a word, didn't move, just stood there, looking at me. But the thing is, I wasn't scared. I should have been, standing there in the dark with this tall, strange person staring me down. But I wasn't. There was something about her, something calming. It was like all the stress, the worries of the farm, just melted away in her presence. I couldn't stop looking at her. That tight bodysuit shimmered slightly in the moonlight. She looked like she'd stepped straight out of another world. And then I saw it. The craft. It was sitting just behind her, hovering silently above the ground. It was a smooth metallic disc. It must have been about 40 or 50 feet across. It was obviously not from this world, because I have never seen a plane like that. There were no wings or engines or anything. I don't know how long we stood there, staring at each other. Time seemed to slow down, or maybe it stopped altogether. She never spoke, but somehow I could feel what she wanted to say. It wasn't words exactly, but feelings, emotions, a deep sense of calm, curiosity, and something else. A kind of connection, like she knew me, like we were meant to meet. I should have been terrified. I should have run, or at least grabbed my rifle. But I couldn't. There was something about her that made me feel safe, like nothing bad could happen as long as she was there. And so, I just stood there, rooted to the spot, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. After that first night, I didn't think I'd see her again. It felt like some strange dream, one I couldn't explain but couldn't forget either. But a few nights later, she came back. Same spot, same quiet calm about her. This time, I wasn't as shocked, though I still couldn't wrap my head around what was happening. I stood there, waiting, and that's when it started. The feeling, the connection. It wasn't like talking, not in the way we humans do. I could hear her in my mind, clear as day, even though her lips never moved. She didn't need to speak. Her thoughts and emotions flowed straight into me. At first it was overwhelming, like being hit with a wave of information all at once. But soon, I started to make sense of it. She was from a star system far beyond anything I'd ever imagined, a place I couldn't even begin to comprehend. She told me about her people, how they've been visiting Earth for centuries. Just watching, learning, said they weren't here to cause trouble, just trying to understand us. And for some reason, she picked me. Never said why, but I could feel it. That connection between us growing stronger each time she came back. As the weeks passed, her visits became more frequent. Sometimes, we'd just stand there together, under the stars, barely saying a word. We didn't need to. It was like just being close to her filled me up, like we were connected in a way I couldn't quite wrap my head around. Then one night, things took a turn. She invited me onto her craft. I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen anything like it. The walls were smooth, almost alive, with soft lights that seemed to pulse with energy. Everything was quiet, but there was a hum in the air, like the ship itself was breathing. It wasn't cold or sterile, though. It felt strangely comfortable, like stepping into a space built just for us. That night, inside her ship, she got even closer to me. I won't get into all the details. The way we connected, physically and emotionally, was like nothing I'd ever experienced. It was intense, exhilarating, like being part of something much bigger than just the two of us. And yet, there was a gentleness to it, something that made me feel alive in ways I hadn't before. Every moment with her was powerful, like we were merging together, not just bodies, but minds, souls. It left me breathless, and I knew I was in deep, far deeper than I'd ever been with anyone. But as much as I craved those moments, I struggled to make sense of it all. How could a bloke like me, a wheat belt farmer, end up here, inside an alien ship, with someone from another world? The more I thought about it, the more confused I got. It didn't make sense, none of it. But when I was with her, none of that mattered. It all felt too right to question. Still, when she left, I'd be alone again, staring up at the stars, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. It was like waking from a dream, unsure if any of it was real, but feeling in my bones that it was. It wasn't long before I started to feel like I was living in two different worlds. There was the life I'd always known, the farm, the routine, the familiar faces in town, and then there was her, this strange otherworldly connection that had become part of my nights. The more time I spent with her, the more the lines between those two worlds began to blur. During the day, I'd try to keep things normal. I'd get up, tend to the sheep, fix the fences, and head into town for supplies like I always did. But something was off, and I knew people were starting to notice. Old mates at the pub would ask why I seemed distracted, why I wasn't my usual self. I'd brush it off, say I was just tired from the farm work or that I'd been having trouble sleeping. But the truth was, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. At night, when she came, everything felt right, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But when she was gone, I felt lost. I'd sit there, staring out at the stars, wondering if I was losing my mind. I mean, how could I explain this to anyone? A bloke like me, having a relationship, if you could call it that, with an alien. It sounded ridiculous even to me, and I was the one living it. I couldn't tell anyone, not my family, not the few mates I had left. How could I? They'd think I was mad, and maybe I was. I started keeping to myself more, avoiding conversations, avoiding people. Whenever I did see them, I could feel their eyes on me, like they knew something was up, but couldn't quite put their finger on it. I'd shrug off their questions with half-hearted excuses, but I knew they didn't believe me. Hell, I barely believed myself. Some nights, after she'd gone, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. Was this real? Or had I gone completely off the rails? I'd think about the way she made me feel, how calm, how connected we were, and then I'd think about the fact that she wasn't even human. It didn't add up, and yet somehow it did. It felt more real than anything I'd ever known. But that didn't stop the doubts from creeping in. I'd catch myself staring off into space, wondering if any of it was true or if I'd just gone mad from being out here alone for too long. My family, when they'd visit, noticed something was different. They'd ask if I was all right, and I'd tell them I was fine, just busy with the farm. But they weren't convinced, and neither was I. I felt torn between two worlds, the real one I'd known my whole life, and this strange, unexplainable one that had come into my nights. I didn't know which one I belonged to anymore. One night, after weeks of her visits, something changed. Usually, we'd just stand there in the field, or sometimes she'd lead me closer to her craft, and we'd share that strange, silent connection. But this time, it was different. I could feel it the moment she arrived. There was an urgency in the air, a tension I hadn't felt before. She didn't waste any time. The connection between us sparked up almost instantly, and I started getting these flashes of images, like memories, but they weren't mine. I saw Earth, but not as it is now. I saw cities, landscapes, entire continents devastated, like something out of a nightmare. Then, I saw her world, her people, how they had been watching us for longer than I could fathom. Through the images, she showed me that her people, her race, had been observing humanity for centuries. They weren't here to interfere, but they had been keeping tabs on us, watching as we grew, advanced, and inevitably as we made the same mistakes they once did. She explained, in that wordless way of hers, that the path we were on was dangerous, more dangerous than most of us could imagine. And the greatest threat was something we'd created ourselves: nuclear war. Her people had seen it happen before, on other worlds. Civilizations that reached a certain point, that harnessed the power of the atom and then turned it against themselves. They watched as those worlds tore themselves apart, and they feared the same would happen here, on Earth. She told me that her people weren't the only ones out there, and that Earth wasn't the only place they watched. But something about our planet, about humanity, had caught their attention. There was a potential here, a chance to avoid the fate others had faced. That's why they had made contact with certain humans over the years. People they believed could handle the truth, people who could spread the warning. She warned me that we were closer to the brink than most of us realized. The threat of nuclear war was growing, even if we couldn't see it yet. She didn't spell out the details, but I could feel the weight of it, the danger that loomed over us all, and she made it clear that their purpose wasn't to save us. They couldn't do that. We had to save ourselves. The more she showed me, the more I understood why she had come to me, why she'd chosen someone like me, a simple farmer in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't because I was special or different, but because I was grounded in a world that was real, untainted by the chaos and corruption that seemed to be pulling everything apart. Maybe she thought I'd see things clearly, or maybe I was just another voice to add to the warnings that had already been given. But whatever the reason, the message was clear. If we didn't change our path, we were heading for destruction. And once it started, there'd be no stopping it. I knew it couldn't last forever, but when the time came, it hit me harder than I ever thought it would. One night, as we stood together in that familiar spot, something was different. I could feel it in the way she looked at me, the way her presence seemed heavier, like it carried a weight I wasn't ready to bear. Without words, she let me know. This was her last visit, at least for a while. She had to leave. I don't know where, and she didn't say when she'd be back. All I could feel was this deep sense of farewell, and it cut through me in a way I wasn't prepared for. She didn't need to explain why. I already knew. Her mission here was finished, at least for now, and there were other things, other places she had to attend to. She promised to return, though she didn't say when. It could be weeks, months, maybe even years. That uncertainty gnawed at me, leaving me with more questions than answers. Would I ever see her again? Or was this it? Just one strange chapter in a life that would go back to normal? When she left, it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that fills your ears after a storm passes. I watched her walk back toward her craft, that familiar glow surrounding her. It lifted off the ground without a sound, slowly rising into the night sky. And then, just like that, she was gone. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty sky, waiting for a sign, anything that might tell me this wasn't the end. But there was nothing, just the stars, as silent as ever. Now, I'm left here wondering what comes next. Part of me hopes she'll return, that I'll see that soft glow in the sky again one night. But another part of me knows that this kind of thing doesn't follow our rules. There's no way of knowing if or when she'll be back. In the meantime, all I'm left with is this feeling, this sense of longing that I can't shake. I go about my days, working the farm, tending to the sheep, fixing what needs fixing. But in the back of my mind, she's always there. Every time I look up at the night sky, I wonder if she's watching, if she's somewhere out there, thinking about me the way I'm thinking about her. I suppose life has to go on, even when you've had a glimpse of something far beyond what most people will ever know. But it's hard. It's hard to go back to the way things were when you've seen the stars up close and felt a connection that defies explanation. I just don't know if I'll ever be the same. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what happened, about her and everything she showed me. It's changed the way I see the world, the universe, even myself. I used to think the farm, the land, was all there was. Now I know there's so much more, things we can't even begin to understand. I haven't told anyone, not really. Who would believe me? A farmer, talking about aliens and warnings of nuclear war? They'd say I'd lost it, and maybe I have, in a way, but part of me feels like I can't keep this to myself. The truth, as strange as it is, might be the one thing that helps us in the end. But then again, maybe some things are better left unsaid. Cheers. Jack.